Okay, go.
All right, welcome to my friends at Dobie History and all my friends in my classroom right now that you guys cannot see. It is our last day of IB history before your exams in 2024. All right. And so what we are going to do with as many questions as you guys have is just open it up for a Q&A, anything that is on your mind about the exam, about your preparation for the exam, about what you feel like you need to know or don't know well enough right now. Ask now or forever eat your peas. What do we got? Going once. Guys, we're not going to get the views if we don't give them the goods. What do you got?
Okay, so last year during History Week of Americas, we talked about the Spanish-American War.
Yeah.
How, realistically, how much of that content will be on the IB?
Okay, great question for any random topic that could pop up within any bullet of paper 3. If you see it in a bullet on your curriculum, it is fair game. So what I'm going to do is go into my curriculum, and I'm right now for you guys, going to IB exam prep, and I'm going to my paper 2 and my paper 3 curriculum, and I'm going to go down and look at the paper 3 topic, the emergence of Americas in global affairs. And I am going to see within that Spanish-American War causes and effects. That means, and it hasn't been asked about in the May or November exams, that means if that's going to be a topic that you're going in comfortable with, you better know the causes and the effects of the Spanish-American War. You should have in your back pocket a handful of the causes. You should be able to evaluate. Guys, every IB question that you are writing, we're probably going to be taking some kind of evaluative stance of what is more and what's less important. So is there a really big, and this isn't my topic, I don't know much about this, is there a really big reason the Spanish-American War started? Are there other factors that led to the fighting of the Spanish-American War? If you could write an essay, and you got to think, you got 50 minutes to write. It's a lot. It's one topic where you'd have a lot of time to expound on it, right? So how much do you need to know? As much as you can. It's a fair game question. It's one of the bullets you can write about. I would have a list of 2 or 3 or 4 causes of the Spanish-American War. Maybe one thing that some people think is a cause, like the explosion of the Maine or something, but may not have been actually a very important cause, whatever, or maybe it was, I don't know, it's not my jam. And then you should have some of the effects of the Spanish-American War in your back pocket. If it's in there, it's fair game. What else we got? Brendan.
We were encouraged last year for our paper 3 to get full marks for one of the criteria. It was about introducing new perspectives.
Yep.
And last year's history teacher said that we could include perspectives of historians and what they said. Is that encouraged or not?
Okay, this is, I'm looking at a paper 2 mark scheme, but paper 3 is really the same. And we're looking all the way down at this trickiest of mark bands, the analysis, perspectives, and conclusions. This is what separates the little boy papers from the man papers, right? This is what's gonna give you what could be a moderate score to a score that's knocking it out of the park, right? Now, everything is important to get on high mark bands, but this ends up being the tough one. Let me talk really quickly about our 4 criteria that we need to be meeting. Focus and structure. Psh, easy peasy. Do you answer the full question? That should be easy for you. Are you actually focused on the question that you're dealing with? And guys, don't play games with it. Use the language of the question in your response. Structure. Do you have a structure within like a normal essay structure? Or are you a one paragraph hero, right? No, we're going to have an introduction. We're going to have a thesis. We're going to let the reader know where our paper is going to go to argue our points. We're going to have topic sentences on every body paragraph. We'll have a conclusion to our essay. We know how to structure an essay. IB cares about how well we write our papers. So write the best paper you're capable of writing. But this one shouldn't be too hard to get up to the highest mark bands. Now note this. I'm in the 10 to 12 zone. Responses are generally well structured and organized. although there is some repetition or lack of clarity. Here's how you avoid repetition. Here's how you might avoid lack of clarity. Plan your writing before you start writing. Know where your paper is going to go before you start down that road. All right? When you plan your writing, when you know what your main points are going to be, you're going to be less repetitive. Coolio? Cool. The next one, knowledge and your context. This is like the historical stuff. This is your key terms and your facts that you can drop into your paper. Do you actually have the history chops in order to answer the question that you have chosen? Do you have some factual evidence? Can you drop real people's names? Do you know like when things are happening? Do you know the context in which things are taking place? If you do, you'll be in the higher mark bands. Great, that's awesome. Now, the only way to do this is if you are blessed with an incredible memory or you put in the work to study. That's it. Examples, links, comparisons. Now, this doesn't work for every single question, but especially those ones that give you two things to compare, like our two states, our two leaders, right? Maybe two wars, whatever we're doing with. The examples you choose to discuss are appropriate and relevant, and they're used effectively to support the analysis and evaluation. Great. Like, you have chosen two appropriate things. This often gets kids dinged when like they don't pick two leaders from two regions or something like that. All right? So be careful with that. Oh, and don't make the disastrous error of seeing a question, I think it might be like question 5 on your test from one of the earlier topics on paper 3. And one of the questions is going to be this will be the world history topics actually. One of the questions is like the importance of leaders in any two wars. And you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that would be a great question like that so early in the game. And you're going to run through it and write for 3 pages. And you're going to come out and people are going to be like, what question did you do? And you're going to be like, one kid's going to be like, I did number 19 on this about the Cold War. And another kid's going to be like, I did number 16 about this, about authoritarian states. And you're like, oh, I did number 5 about the role of two leaders in war. And they're like, number 5? Ugh. That's leaders in war from 750 to 1,000. You're 1,000 years off. You're dead in the water. It's not going to work for you. You have no good focus, and your examples are off mark. So be careful. Make sure you go to our topics or your topics that you've studied. Watch those ads. So anyway, our last one, the analysis, perspectives, and conclusion. This is where, if you're getting lower marks, here we go. The response moves beyond description. When we're talking description, that's our narrative history. That's when I'm just telling you about something. This happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. And you could do okay. You can absolutely get a 4 or maybe even a 5 if that's all you're doing. But to get higher, we need to have some analysis. Analysis is the why. Don't tell me the Tet Offensive, tell me just what it was. Tell me the Tet Offensive was a coordinated communist attack against Americans and South Vietnamese in hopes of turning the tide of the battle and forcing the Americans to ultimately start withdrawing. Give me some why things are happening. And wherever you can put in the why, that's analysis, right? But then when we're bumping up to the next, okay, you've got critical analysis. Good. There is some awareness and evaluation of different perspectives. Here is where I think there are 2 schools of thought. Different perspectives could be different historians that have written and have quotes and have discussed a particular issue. And one guy might be over here and one woman might be over there, and they have different views on a historical issue. If you present a specific historian's ideas in support of your argument, that can be helpful. If you maybe have a historian that you disagree with and you offer some reason why we shouldn't give that a lot of credence, that could be very helpful, right? But realistically, Most students can't do that. Now, if you know that there's like some hot button historian that kind of checks a box, or a school of history that believes a particular thing, great. But most students cannot walk into this IB exam with 15 different historians that talked about 15 different issues that they're going to name drop on papers. And when students try to do that, they end up kind of screwing it up, or they just name drop people without actually using the arguments to support it. What is far more important is not the historian that said it. What's far more important is the idea. The idea that not everybody agrees, or that there are different perspectives on these historical issues. And that is where, like, if the question is, to what extent was Joseph Stalin most responsible for the origin of the Cold War? You give me some reasons why Joseph Stalin is responsible for the origin of the Cold War, but you also say, however, there are other factors at play here. For example, some of the moves of Harry Truman, blah, blah, blah. That is also giving perspectives and, an evaluation of those ideas. So just doing that alone will push you to these highest mark bands. Do not think that you need to name drop historians. Most students that do it poorly, and it's not worth the memorization. Now, if you happen to know somebody that seems to have some kind of freakish memory and work ethic that wants to go learn a bunch of historians' names and drop them into paper, more power to you. It ain't gonna hurt you unless you don't actually evaluate those ideas. All right? Cool. What other questions do we have? That doesn't sound so scary, guys. It should be very manageable to get to that 7 to 9 mark band. And then to get higher, know your stuff, organize your paper well, stay focused on the question, and have analysis when you can, and give multiple perspectives. If we get that atomic bomb question, don't just write a big paper about how we dropped the atomic bomb because we needed to get Japan's rapid surrender. Bring up other factors that contributed to it. Bring up what some people argue that you don't agree with, and tell me why you don't agree with it. That is an awareness and an evaluation of different perspectives. That's all you got to do. What other questions we got? Yes?
For papers 2 and 3, do you get 2 question options for each topic?
So every topic is going to have those 2 question options. We can, again, take a look at what a real paper 2 looks like. We got one right, nope, that's the topics. Where do I have it? Don't I have practice questions? Don't I have that? Oh, past paper 2? No? Yeah, whatever. Here's a bunch of mark schemes. What? Where are they? I put them in here. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I had, you know what? I think I might have planned to do that and never did it. All right, anyway. Yeah, so for every topic that you see, there's going to be 2 questions. But the thing you need to pay attention to on paper 2, for those 2 questions that you get on authoritarian states, you got to pick your favorite. And then the other one is dead to you. Then you go to our Cold War topic and pick your favorite. The other one is dead to you. You do 2 questions from 2 topics. Paper 3, likewise, we'll have 2 questions for every topic. You get to pick the 3 favorite questions that you have, whatever 3. What do you do if you go to, God forbid, you go to the Cold War in the Americas, and you go to World War II in the Americas, and you maybe even go to what else you studied, and you're only feeling good about 2 of those 6 questions? What do you do if you don't know what your 3rd essay should be? No, don't cry. There's no crying in IB history. Yeah, there probably is. IB French, there's a lot of crying. Not IB history. Anyway, where's the most crying at these days? Math? Chem? Oh, yeah.
Physics.
Yeah. Physics? Yeah. No crying in IB history. So here's what you do. If you really don't like the other 4 questions that you maybe should be able to answer, we just don't love them, that's when you go wander through the other 30 questions that are on the test. And you see if there's something in your wheelhouse. Maybe there's a question about slavery in the Americas that just by nature of your education, you might be able to fumble yourself through a mediocre essay for. Or maybe there's something on the American Civil War or the American Revolution. Maybe there's something in the modern era that you're like, wait a minute, I'm alive. I understand that technology in the modern era has changed the United States. Whatever, see what you can do with it. The only guarantee is if you throw in the towel and if you write nothing and if you put your head down, you'll get a 0. So write something. Try to grab something. Again, you don't know if you're going to get a 6. You don't know if you're 1 point away from a 5. And if you threw in the towel because you're like, that's enough. Maybe you don't get that 6 that you were shooting for. Chances are, though, even if you had to bullcrap your way through an essay, the stuff that we covered, you could probably bullcrap a little bit better. All right? Cool. What other questions do we have? Yes?
So for paper 1 with like the OPCVL,
Yeah.
I understand that for purpose, if it's like from a primary source from the time period, that might, like, for example, the one that we did where it was the Japanese government, right? And how the purpose being that they were the Japanese government.
You're kind of telling me about origin more than purpose.
But they were publishing it.
Okay, so they're publishing it to let like their people know what they're up to. Yes, that would be the purpose.
But then if it's like a scholarly article just written for the purpose of
Informing.
discovering
Yeah.
something,
So here's what okay, great question. So what if it's like a secondary source on a particular topic? We'll just do the same one, like Japan's aggression in the 1930s or whatever. If it's a scholarly article or a book, right? And we're trying to deal with the purpose. That's where you can judge a book or an article by its cover or by its title. So if the book or the article is Japanese foreign policy from the Meiji Restoration through the 1990s, you would be the purpose of this document, not just the little excerpt that they have, but the purpose of that whole source. The purpose of this source is to give an overview or a survey of Japanese foreign policy for this century of time. That would be valuable because it can provide context. While it will provide some information on this topic, it'll provide context of what came before and what came after this time period in question for a historian. Or let's say it is, you could also say it's limited because the scope is so broad, it'll have very little information on the specific time period that we need. Or let's say it's a book or an article on Japanese foreign policy in the 1930s. Now the purpose is to discuss Japanese foreign policy in the 1930s, which is valuable because it is trying to inform the reader about this very narrow time period and the topic that I'm researching. So you're judging the book by its cover. Does that make sense?
So then, how does that differ from content?
How does that differ from the content? So that when we're looking at the content, we are now looking specifically at what is in the little excerpt they've given us. Like it makes mention of this particular aspect of Japanese foreign policy, or talks about this particular thing, which would be valuable for a historian. However, maybe it is limited because it is not delving into other issues or whatever. But again, remember, you don't need a value and a limitation for all three of those things. You just need to make sure values and limitations are addressed, and origin, purpose, and content are addressed. Hear ye, hear ye. The easiest place to check 2 boxes is the origin. Because the origin, you're going to get the title, the date of publication, the author. And between those things, you can get values and limitations for each of them. So do both of them for origin. I got a hand over here.
So say you had a source that whoever is writing the source is like clearly very biased towards one way or another. Is that a limitation for the origin or content?
So how do we handle bias, right? Everything has a perspective. Everything has some level of bias. You will never get credit for just mentioning something is limited because it's biased. What you could say, though, is the content of the source, which discusses this, however, is limited for a historian because it is only presenting the opinion of this person from this perspective. So you don't necessarily say it's biased or it's wrong. In the same way, we're not going to say something comes from a government so it's accurate, right? All they are doing, all these sources are doing is giving the information coming through the filter of whoever wrote it. So if something is biased, you can say, you know, because this comes from a Japanese author, it may only be offering a Japanese perspective. Which, if you were a real historian, you'd probably want to get a Filipino perspective, or a Malaysian perspective, or an American perspective, or a Chinese perspective, or whatever. That's what this whole task is about. If you're a real historian, you've got what you got, but you also have to think about, what else do I need to find? What else should I be trying to get my hands on? Cool. What other questions? Yeah.
What is like a typical value for a secondary source?
Guys, secondary sources are no better or worse than primary sources. We got it into our heads somewhere along the lines. I don't know who to blame. Who should I blame?
Elementary school.
Elementary. No, you know what? I would not want to fight that war. You know what? I don't blame anybody. I blame Nate. Nate, why did you do this to us? So here's the deal. Somewhere we got into our head. Here's the problem. Here's why that happened. Somebody heard along the way. And remember, okay, elementary teachers. God bless. Anybody going to be an elementary teacher in your future? Zach? No? Anybody? Okay. God bless them. Because they not only have to teach everything, especially if the younger kids, they got to wipe noses and put on winter pants. And oh my gosh, we can do that all day long. So here's the deal. We hear that primary sources are really valuable. That historians, when they do their research, they go to the primary sources. They try to look at what the original person really said. And what happens in our heads is that we hear primary sources are valuable, and then we think, therefore, secondary sources are less than. And that's not the case at all. Primary sources are valuable. However, we don't want to get the impression that primary sources are always like accurate or relevant or whatever, right? Like, keep in mind, everything Joe Biden says is a primary source of what Joe Biden is saying. Everything Donald Trump says is a primary source of what Donald Trump is saying. Does everybody agree that what they all say is truthful and valuable? No, not necessarily. But their primary source, it's coming out of them, so we should use it for some kind of interpretation. Secondary sources can be super valuable because they often provide the scholarship of many historians before them. I mean, if you want to like really know what happened in history, if you're just like a regular person, we don't have the time or the ability to research a bunch of primary sources and to evaluate them to get to the bottom of why they were writing what they were writing. So we rely on historians to do that work for us, and we read secondary sources. But the benefit is secondary sources typically base their research on other secondary sources, other historians' work, and primary sources. So what you would normally do with that is like a secondary, like let's look at a source about Japan from the 1930s. But it was published by a historian in 1997. That is valuable based on its date of publication because the historian would have been able to rely on other scholarship previously done and declassified documents or documents that have been found in the previous 60 years that earlier historians wouldn't have had. That makes that very valuable. That's why we often talk about modern scholarship being pretty valuable because that more valuable, like for example, you know Edward Gibbon is?
No.
You don't?
Edward Gibbon?
Gibbon.
No.
History of the Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic?
Did he write that?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Are you?
I'm like a history guy.
No, you know that. That's something you know.
No, I don't know.
Come on.
I don't know.
We have a Quiz Bowl tournament coming up. Okay, we'll talk about that. Well, anyway, he wrote like what seemingly was the definitive guide to the history of Rome. But most historians today are like, no, it's like it was the best maybe he could do in 1776. It was a big year for books. But it's not seen as like good history today. Modern scholarship is just different methods and resources and tools at their disposal. Anyway, what other questions we got? let me leave you with this. The IB history exam is easy to pass, hard to knock out of the park. All right? Hard to fail. You have to like actively have done not much of anything over the past 2 years and actively be willing to mail it in on the exam day to not get yourself to that 4 zone. We will sometimes have kids that don't get 4s. Harder to fail. Hard to get 6s and 7s. If you're planning on getting a 6 or a 7, you know what you need to do. You got to go to your bullets, and you got to make sure you're solid on it. There are no surprises on the IB history exam. There's disappointment in not getting the exact question we wanted, but there should be no surprises to you. All right? And then you just write. You write, and you write, and you write. And if you think you know some facts, you put them in. And if you can do the whys, you put it in. You follow the rules on the paper 1, you write for paper 2, and you write for paper 3. And when you think you're done, check back and see if you can write some more. Don't put your head down. When you finish each of your essays on paper 2 and paper 3, turn to the next page or whatever, so you can leave like a half a page of space. Maybe you want to go back later and add something that you've thought of. That'd be huge. All right? You never know what's going to get you that extra point. All right. We're good. Bye, Dobie Cast History.
Bye.